The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corridors of the Galactic Academy on Nexus Prime, where representatives from dozens of species gathered to learn about interstellar diplomacy and trade. The Academy stood as a symbol of unity among the civilized races, its crystalline towers reaching toward the purple sky like fingers of hope. Marcus Chen walked these halls with the casual confidence that seemed to characterize all humans, though to his alien classmates, his very presence was both fascinating and terrifying. At 6 feet tall with dark hair and calm brown eyes, he appeared unremarkable by human standards. But, to the other species in the Academy, he was a walking reminder of why humans were classified as a Class 7 Deathworlder species. The classification wasn't meant as an insult. It was simply a fact. Humans came from Earth, a planet so hostile that most galactic species would die within hours of setting foot on its surface. The gravity was crushing, the atmosphere was corrosive, the weather patterns were catastrophic, and the native lifeforms were universally aggressive. That humans had not only survived but thrived on such a world made them objects of both admiration and fear throughout the galaxy. In the Academy's advanced xenobiology classroom, Professor Vextari, a tall, graceful Etherian with translucent blue skin and, for delicate arms, was conducting her morning lecture. Her species was known for their advanced medical knowledge and peaceful nature. They had eliminated violence from their society over 3,000 years ago and viewed any form of aggression as a mental illness to be treated with compassion. Today we will discuss the fascinating adaptations that allow various species to survive in hostile environments, Professor Vextari said, her melodious voice carrying easily through the circular amphitheater. Her large, silver eyes swept over the diverse collection of students. Consider the thermal Krillians, who can withstand temperatures that would instantly vaporize most organic matter. Marcus sat in the middle section, surrounded by his usual study group. To his left was Zyxandra, a crystalline whose body resembled living gemstone and who communicated through harmonic vibrations. Her species was incredibly old and wise, having achieved interstellar travel when humans were still discovering fire. To his right sat Pip, a small, furry Nemorian who looked like a cross between a koala and a hamster. The Nemorians were known for their incredible technological aptitude despite their diminutive size. Behind them sat Corvin, a massive saurian whose reptilian ancestors had dominated their homeworld for millions of years. Despite his intimidating appearance, with scales like armor plating and teeth designed for ripping flesh, Corvin was studying to become a peace negotiator. His species had learned through bitter experience that their natural aggression needed to be channeled constructively. The key to understanding survival adaptations, Professor Vextari continued, is recognizing that what seems impossible to one species may be routine for another. Take the pressure tolerances of deep ocean dwellers, or the radiation resistance of the solar-touched. A thin tentacle shot up from the front row. It belonged to Kethmori, an aquatic deepworlder whose tank suit allowed him to attend surface classes. Professor, what about the psychological adaptations? Some species develop mental characteristics that help them survive harsh conditions. An excellent question, the professor replied. Mental resilience is indeed crucial. The ability to remain calm under extreme stress, to think clearly when facing mortal danger, to make split-second decisions that mean the difference between life and death. These traits are often just as important as physical adaptations. Pip squeaked softly to Marcus, is it true that humans can stay awake for days when they need to? Marcus smiled, keeping his voice low. Some of us can. My grandfather once stayed awake for 4 days straight during a hurricane rescue operation. Zyxandra's crystalline body hummed with curiosity. Your species' endurance capabilities are legendary. We have studied the accounts of humans crossing frozen wastelands and surviving in deserts for weeks. Evolution's a harsh teacher, Marcus replied simply. Earth doesn't give you many second chances. Professor Vextari was now discussing the social structures that evolved among cooperative species when a sharp alarm pierced the air. The sound was unlike the usual drill signals, this was the emergency alert that every student had been taught to recognize but hoped never to hear. Attention all students and faculty, came the announcement over the Academy's communication system. The voice belonged to Director Havek, but it carried a tension that made several students shift nervously in their seats. We have a security breach in Section 7. All classes are to shelter in place until further notice. This is not a drill. A collective murmur ran through the classroom as students from various species processed this information according to their cultural backgrounds. The Etherians like Professor Vextari immediately began stress-calming breathing exercises. The Nemorians huddled together, their small forms trembling slightly. The crystallines resonated with harmonic frequencies that helped center their thoughts. Marcus, however, did something that surprised his classmates. He pulled out his personal communicator and began quickly accessing the Academy's security feeds, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Marcus," Professor Vextari said gently, "please put away your device. We should all remain calm and wait for instructions." "With respect, Professor," Marcus said, not looking up from his screen, "I want to know what we're dealing with." "Information is better than ignorance." Corbin leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the seats below. "What does your device show?" Marcus's expression grew serious as he studied the feeds. "Security breach in the residence quarter. Multiple casualties reported. Armed intruder moving toward the academic section." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "It looks like we're dealing with a ravager." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ravagers were among the most feared criminals in the galaxy, individuals who had undergone illegal genetic and cybernetic modifications that enhanced their physical capabilities while destroying their capacity for empathy or reason. They were living weapons, created by underground organizations and sent out to spread terror. "A ravager?" Pip's voice was barely a whisper. "But they're supposed to be extinct. The Galactic Council eliminated the last of the modification labs decades ago." "Apparently not all of them," Marcus said grimly. He looked up at Professor Vextari, whose blue skin had taken on a pale, almost transparent quality. "Professor, we need to secure this room. The standard lockdown procedures won't stop a ravager." Professor Vextari's four hands fluttered uncertainly. "The Academy security forces will handle this situation. We are not equipped to deal with such violence." "The Academy security forces are trained for handling student disputes and minor theft," Marcus replied, standing up. "They're not prepared for this." ZYXandra's harmonics took on an urgent frequency. "Marcus speaks truth. Our research indicates that Ravagers possess strength equivalent to heavy industrial equipment and pain tolerance that makes them nearly unstoppable once they begin an attack." The sound of distant screaming drifted through the Academy's ventilation system, followed by the unmistakable noise of something heavy being thrown against a wall. Several students whimpered, and Professor Vextari's hands began to shake. Marcus walked to the front of the classroom and began examining the door's locking mechanism. "This won't hold for more than a few seconds against a ravager. We need to create additional barriers." "What do you propose?" Corbin asked, his predatory instincts beginning to surface despite his peaceful intentions. "We move the heavy tables against the door. Create a funnel that forces any intruder to approach from a single direction. Set up defensive positions using the lab equipment as cover." Marcus's voice was calm and methodical, as if he were discussing homework rather than preparing for a life-or-death situation. The other students stared at him in amazement. While they were paralyzed by fear, the human was already planning their defense. "Marcus," Professor Vextari said, her voice trembling, "violence is not the answer. Perhaps we can reason with this individual." Marcus turned to look at her, and, for a moment, his classmates saw something in his eyes that reminded them exactly what kind of world had shaped humanity. It wasn't cruelty or aggression, it was the cold, practical understanding of a predator who had learned that sometimes violence was the only answer. "Professor," he said gently, "Ravagers have had their capacity for reason surgically removed. You can't negotiate with something that's been programmed to kill." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside, accompanied by a mechanical whirring that sent chills through the assembled students. Whatever was coming toward them moved with purpose and speed. Pip squeaked in terror and scrambled under one of the lab tables. Several other students began to sob quietly. ZYXandra's crystalline form resonated with frequencies of deep distress. Even Corbin, despite his formidable natural weapons, looked uncertain. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun systematically examining the classroom for anything that could be used as a weapon or defensive tool. He pulled chemical containers from the lab stations, checked the stability of the overhead projector mounting, and tested the weight of various pieces of equipment. "What are you doing?" whispered one of the deepwater students from her environment suit. "Preparing," Marcus replied simply. The footsteps were getting closer now, accompanied by a sound like metal scraping against stone. Through the door's window, a shadow passed by, something tall and angular that moved with unnatural speed. Professor Vextari had backed against the far wall, her forehands pressed against her chest in her species' gesture of ultimate distress.
This cannot be happening.
The Academy is a place of peace and learning. Sometimes peace has to be defended, Marcus said, positioning himself near the door. The shadow passed by the window again, and this time they could see it clearly. The Ravager had once been humanoid, but extensive modifications had transformed it into something that belonged in a nightmare. Its arms had been replaced with mechanical appendages that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its legs were cybernetic, allowing it to move with inhuman speed and precision. Most disturbing of all, its head had been partially replaced with a targeting system that glowed with malevolent red light. The creature stopped outside their classroom door and turned its sensor array toward the window. For a moment, it seemed to be scanning the room, counting the life forms inside. Then, it smiled, revealing teeth that had been replaced with serrated metal implements designed for maximum damage. The Ravager raised one clawed hand and placed it against the door. The metal began to glow and warp under the pressure of its enhanced grip. Several students screamed. Professor Vextari collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the sheer wrongness of the creature outside. But Marcus Chen did something that would be talked about for generations among the species of the Galactic Academy. He chuckled. It wasn't a sound of madness or fear. It was the low, confident chuckle of someone who had just realized that the monster trying to break down their door had made a serious mistake. "Marcus?" Corvin whispered, unsure whether his human friend had finally snapped under the pressure. Marcus turned away from the door and began rolling up his sleeves with deliberate calm. "You know what the funny thing is?" he said, his voice carrying easily through the terrified classroom. "This thing thinks it's the apex predator here." The door began to buckle under the Ravager's assault. "It's been modified to be stronger, faster, and more aggressive than its original species," Marcus continued, pulling off his academy jacket and setting it carefully aside. "But its creators made one critical error." The lock gave way with a screech of tortured metal. Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since the crisis began, his classmates saw exactly why humans were classified as a Deathworlder species. It wasn't just their physical capabilities or their endurance. It was the fact that when faced with the ultimate predator, their first instinct wasn't to run or hide. It was to hunt. They assumed that artificial predator beats natural predator, Marcus said, cracking his knuckles as the door began to swing open. But you can't improve on 4 billion years of evolution on a Deathworld. The Ravager stepped into the classroom, its targeting sensors sweeping the room as it selected its first victim. It never got the chance. Marcus moved with a speed that shocked even Corvin, who had thought he understood human capabilities. But this wasn't just about speed, it was about the instant transformation from peaceful student to something that had been forged in the crucible of humanity's most dangerous planet. The Ravager's enhanced reflexes were impressive, but they were programmed responses based on predictable attack patterns. Marcus fought like something wild and unpredictable, using tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. He feinted left, then dove right, rolling under the creature's slashing claws and coming up behind it. Before the Ravager could turn, Marcus had grabbed a heavy molecular scanner from one of the lab stations and brought it down on the creature's knee joint with devastating precision. The Ravager stumbled but didn't fall. It spun around faster than any organic being should have been able to move, its claws whistling through the air where Marcus's head had been a split second before. But Marcus was no longer there. He had anticipated the counterattack and was already moving, staying inside the creature's reach where its long claws were less effective. The watching students could hardly believe what they were seeing. The monstrous Ravager that had terrorized the academy was being systematically dismantled by a human who barely came up to its chest. Marcus wasn't fighting with rage or desperation. He fought with the cold calculation of a predator that had been born on a world where everything wanted to kill you, where making a single mistake meant death, where only the smartest and most adaptable survived. The Ravager tried to grab him with its enhanced grip strength, but Marcus slipped the hold and delivered a precise strike to a cluster of neural interfaces at the base of the creature's skull. Sparks flew from damaged circuitry. "Impossible," Professor Vextari whispered. "How can he match something so enhanced?" Zyxandra's harmonics carried a note of awe. "He is not matching it. He is superior to it." The fight continued for several more seconds, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Ravager had been designed to terrorize civilized species who had long ago abandoned violence. It had never encountered something that had been shaped by a world where violence was simply another survival tool. When the Ravager finally fell, its systems sparking and failing, Marcus stood over it breathing heavily but essentially unharmed. He looked around the classroom at his stunned classmates and professors.
"Sorry about the mess," he said, straightening his shirt. "Is everyone okay?"
The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then, Corvin began to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that spoke of respect and admiration. "Human," the massive Saurian said, "your species continues to amaze us." Marcus helped Professor Vextari to her feet, his manner gentle and reassuring.
"It's over now, Professor. The Academy should be safe."
As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching security forces echoed through the corridors. The crisis was ending, but the questions it raised would linger for much longer.
How had a Ravager penetrated the Academy's security? Who had created it and why? And, perhaps most importantly, what did this incident reveal about the delicate balance of power among the galaxy's species?
But those were questions for another time. For now, Marcus Chen sat back down at his desk and pulled out his notes, ready to continue the interrupted lesson on survival adaptations.
After all, class wasn't over yet. The aftermath of the Ravager incident transformed the Galactic Academy overnight.
What had been a place of peaceful learning became the center of the most intensive security investigation in the institution's 3-century history. The corridors that had once echoed with scholarly discussions now buzzed with the controlled chaos of forensic teams, security analysts, and government investigators from a dozen different species. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, though not entirely by choice. The security footage of his confrontation with the Ravager had been analyzed frame by experts who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The fact that an unenhanced human had defeated a creature designed to be the ultimate killing machine raised questions that went far beyond simple Academy security. 3 days after the incident, Marcus sat in Director Havek's office, surrounded by beings whose very presence indicated how seriously the galactic community was taking this event. Director Havek himself was a distinguished Vorthan, his crystalline carapace reflecting the office's soft lighting as he reviewed reports with methodical precision. To his left stood Commander Rylex of the Galactic Security Force, a Caraxian whose chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles. At the window, gazing out at the Academy grounds, stood someone Marcus hadn't expected to see, Ambassador Threnody of the Etherian High Council. "Mr. Chen," Director Havek began, his translator converting his native harmonic language into Standard Galactic, "we find ourselves in a rather unprecedented situation." Marcus shifted in his chair, which had been designed for beings considerably smaller than humans. "Sir, I hope I haven't caused any diplomatic complications." Commander Rylex turned from his examination of the Ravager's remains, which lay dismantled on a containment field nearby.
"On the contrary, young human.
Your actions have raised some rather important questions about our assumptions regarding combat capabilities among the galactic species." Ambassador Threnody remained at the window, but her melodious voice carried clearly through the room. "The Etherian Council has been studying the security recordings of your encounter. We are puzzled by what we observed."
"Puzzled how, Ambassador?" Marcus asked.
She turned to face him, her translucent blue features thoughtful. "Your fighting style bore no resemblance to any martial art in our databases. You didn't use the structured combat techniques taught in military academies or security training facilities.
Your movements seemed almost improvisational."
Marcus considered his response carefully. "Where I come from, we call it street fighting. It's not really a formal style so much as adaptive problem solving under pressure." "Adaptive problem solving," Director Havek repeated, making notes on his datapad.
"Could you elaborate on this concept?"
"Well," Marcus said, glancing around the room at the assembled officials, "formal martial arts assume you're fighting an opponent who follows certain rules or patterns. But, when you're dealing with something truly dangerous, a natural predator, an environmental hazard, or in this case, a modified killing machine, you can't rely on structured techniques. You have to read the situation in real time and respond with whatever works."
Commander Rylex's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. This suggests a fundamentally different approach to conflict resolution than what most species employ.
"It's not about conflict resolution," Marcus corrected gently.
"It's about survival."
"There's a difference." The distinction seemed to resonate through the room.
Ambassador Threnody exchanged a meaningful look with Director Havek.
"This brings us to the reason for this meeting," Director Havek said. The investigation into the Ravager's origins has uncovered some disturbing information. A holographic display materialized in the center of the office, showing a complex network of connections between various criminal organizations, black market laboratories, and what appeared to be legitimate research facilities. The Ravager that attacked the Academy was not an isolated incident, Commander Rylex explained. Our intelligence indicates that someone is systematically creating these modified killers and deploying them against targets throughout the galaxy. Marcus studied the display, his analytical mind automatically processing the patterns.
These attacks aren't random. They're testing different defenses, gathering data on how various species respond to threats. Precisely, Ambassador Threnody confirmed. Each attack has been carefully designed to probe the weaknesses of our security systems and our natural defensive capabilities. But, your encounter represents the first time a Ravager has been defeated by an unenhanced individual, Director Havek added. This has implications. Marcus began to understand where the conversation was heading. You want me to help you study this problem?
More than study it, Commander Rylex said. We believe whoever is behind these attacks will escalate their efforts now that they know their Ravagers can be defeated. They'll need to understand how and why their perfect weapon failed. The holographic display zoomed in on several star systems, showing the locations of recent Ravager attacks. The pattern was becoming clearer, the attacks were moving in a spiral toward the galactic core worlds, testing the defenses of increasingly important targets.
The next logical target, Ambassador Threnody said quietly, would be the Galactic Council chambers on Centris Prime. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The Galactic Council was the governing body that maintained peace and stability throughout known space. An attack on the Council chambers wouldn't just be terrorism, it would be a declaration of war against galactic civilization itself.
What exactly are you asking me to do?
Marcus inquired.
Director Havek leaned forward in his chair. We're asking you to continue your education here at the Academy, but with a specialized focus. You would work with our security teams to develop new defensive protocols based on your unique approach to threat response. Additionally, Commander Rylex added, we would like you to train select volunteers from various species in these adaptive survival techniques.
Marcus raised an eyebrow. You want me to teach aliens how to fight like humans?
We want you to teach them how to think like humans when facing a threat, Ambassador Threnody clarified. Your species' approach to problem-solving under extreme pressure appears to be fundamentally different from our own. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Director Havek's communication system. Sir, came the voice of his assistant, the student delegation is here for their appointment. Director Havek nodded to the others.
Please, send them in.
The office door slid open to admit Marcus's classmates from the xenobiology course. Corvin ducked his massive frame through the doorway, followed by the floating tank that contained Kethmori. Zyxandra's crystalline form chimed softly as she entered, while Pip scampered along behind, his small form nearly invisible among his larger companions. We apologize for the interruption, Corvin said, his deep voice respectful but determined. But, we felt it was important to be part of this discussion.
Commander Rylex's compound eyes focused on the diverse group.
This is highly irregular. These proceedings involve classified security matters.
With respect, Commander, Zyxandra said, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of ancient authority, we were present during the incident.
We witnessed capabilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of species interactions. Pip squeaked up from near the floor, plus, Marcus is our friend.
If he's going to be involved in something dangerous, we want to help.
Ambassador Threnody smiled, the expression somehow both sad and proud.
Young Nemorian, what you propose would require courage that your species has never been asked to demonstrate.
Our species built the first interstellar communication networks, Pip replied with surprising firmness.
We've been quietly helping hold the galaxy together for centuries. Maybe it's time we did it less quietly.
Kethmori's aquatic form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that his translator converted to speech.
The deep currents carry news of unrest in the outer systems.
Something moves in the darkness beyond our normal perception. If this threat is real, it will eventually reach all of us. Marcus looked around at his friends, seeing the determination in their various features. These beings had been shaped by very different evolutionary pressures than humans, but they possessed something that couldn't be measured in combat effectiveness or physical capability, loyalty.
Director, Marcus said, if I'm going to be involved in this, I want them to be part of it too. Absolutely not, Commander Rylex said immediately.
These individuals have no combat training, no security clearance, and no relevant experience. They have something more valuable, Marcus countered. They understand how different species think and react under pressure.
If we're really dealing with an enemy that's targeting the entire galactic community, we need perspectives from the entire galactic community.
Director Havok considered this, his crystalline features refracting the office lighting in complex patterns.
There is precedent for civilian consultants in matters of galactic security.
But it would require extensive background checks and security protocols. More importantly, Ambassador Threnody added, it would place you all in considerable danger. The entities behind these attacks have demonstrated a willingness to target innocent civilians.
Corvin's massive frame straightened to its full height. Ambassador, my species evolved as apex predators. We understand danger.
But we also understand that some threats can only be faced together. The conversation continued for another hour, covering security protocols, training requirements, and the logistics of involving civilian students in a galactic security operation. Throughout it all, Marcus found himself impressed by his friend's commitment and disturbed by the growing scope of the threat they were facing. When the meeting finally concluded, the group had been granted provisional consultant status, pending security clearances and specialized training. They would work with Academy Security to develop new defensive protocols while continuing their regular studies as cover for their activities. As they left Director Havok's office, Marcus's personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. The sender's identification was encrypted, but the message itself was chillingly simple: impressive demonstration in the classroom, human.
But that was just the beginning. Enjoy your small victory while you can. Marcus showed the message to his friends, watching as each of them processed the implications in their own way. Corvin's predatory instincts surfaced, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the corridor for threats. Zyxandra's crystalline form resonated with frequencies that indicated deep concern. Pip's small form trembled slightly, but his eyes remained determined.
So they know about you specifically now, Kathmori observed, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with patterns that suggested tactical thinking.
This complicates the situation.
It also gives us an advantage, Marcus replied. They're focused on me, which means they might underestimate the rest of you. They made their way back toward the dormitory section, passing through corridors that had been subtly reinforced since the attack. Additional security scanners hummed quietly at regular intervals, and Marcus noticed that several Academy staff members now carried emergency beacons.
Marcus, Pip said quietly, can I ask you something?
Sure.
When you were fighting that thing, you didn't look scared at all. How do humans do that? Marcus considered the question as they walked. It's not that we don't feel fear. Fear keeps you alive.
But, on Earth, if you let fear paralyze you, you die. So we learn to use fear as information instead of letting it control us.
What kind of information? Zyxandra asked.
Fear tells you what's dangerous and how dangerous it is.
Once you know that, you can make better decisions about how to respond.
They reached the dormitory common area, where other students were gathered around holographic displays showing news feeds from across the galaxy. The reports were troubling. More Ravager attacks had occurred on 3 different worlds in the past 24 hours. Each attack had been more sophisticated than the last, suggesting that whoever was orchestrating them was learning and adapting. Look at this, called out Veshtar, a young Etherian whose blue skin was pale with distress. The attack on Kepler Station.
12 casualties and the entire research facility destroyed.
Marcus studied the footage, noting the patterns of destruction and the efficiency of the assault.
This wasn't random vandalism. They were looking for something specific.
The research data, Corvin rumbled. Kepler Station specializes in xenobiology research.
Specifically, they study species adaptation and enhancement.
The pieces were beginning to form a picture that Marcus didn't like. Someone was gathering information about the biological capabilities of various galactic species, using Ravager attacks as both research tools and weapons of terror. The ultimate goal remained unclear, but the systematic nature of the campaign suggested something far more sinister than simple terrorism. As the evening wore on and the common area gradually emptied, Marcus found himself alone with his core group of friends. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges ahead.
Finally, Kathmori broke the silence.
Marcus, there's something you should know about the deep water species. We have capabilities that most surface dwellers are unaware of.
What kind of capabilities? Echolocation that can penetrate most forms of concealment. Pressure tolerance that allows us to survive in environments that would crush other beings.
And, most importantly, we can sense electrical activity from considerable distances. Marcus looked at his aquatic friend with new interest.
That could be incredibly useful for detecting hidden ravagers. That's what I was thinking.
And, I suspect each of our species has capabilities that might be relevant to this situation, things that wouldn't be obvious from standard academic profiles.
Pip nodded enthusiastically. Nemorians are really good at getting into small spaces and accessing computer systems.
We design most of the galaxy's information networks, so we know how to move through them unseen.
My people see light across a much broader spectrum than most species, Xandra added.
We can detect energy signatures that are invisible to standard sensors. Corvin's smile revealed teeth that had been designed for tearing flesh. And, Saurians are much better hunters than most civilized species, remember. We've spent so long being diplomats that everyone forgets we were apex predators for 50 million years. Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling he did just before the Ravager broke down the classroom door. It was the moment when chaos resolved into clarity, when random elements suddenly formed a coherent pattern. I think I understand what's really happening here, he said slowly.
Whoever is behind these attacks isn't just testing our defenses.
They're cataloging our capabilities. They want to know exactly what each species can do before they make their real move.
But why?
Pip asked.
What could they possibly gain from that information?
Marcus's expression grew grim as the full scope of the threat became clear.
They're not planning to defeat us. They're planning to replace us.
The implications of that statement would keep them all awake for the rest of the night, planning and preparing for a conflict that none of them fully understood yet. But one thing was becoming clear: the galaxy was about to face a threat unlike anything it had ever encountered, and the only hope of stopping it might lie in the most unlikely alliance of species ever assembled. The next morning would bring new challenges, new revelations, and the beginning of a journey that would take them far from the safety of the Academy and into the heart of a conspiracy that threatened the very fabric of galactic civilization. But tonight, they had each other, and, for now, that would have to be enough. The secure research facility beneath the Galactic Academy hummed with activity that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. What had once been storage areas for historical artifacts had been converted into a state-of-the-art analysis center, complete with quantum computers, molecular scanners, and containment fields that could hold samples of the most dangerous substances in the galaxy. Marcus stood before a holographic display that showed the dismantled Ravager in three-dimensional detail, its various components highlighted in different colors to indicate their function and origin. Beside him, Dr. Cathril, a renowned Vorthan xenobiologist, manipulated the display with precise movements of her crystalline appendages. The organic components are fascinating, Dr. Cathril observed, her harmonic voice tinged with professional admiration and ethical revulsion.
Whoever created this being possessed an understanding of biological enhancement that rivals our most advanced medical centers.
But they made critical errors, Marcus noted, pointing to specific areas of the display. The integration between organic and mechanical systems is flawed. The neural pathways were brutally severed and rerouted, which eliminated higher cognitive functions but also created exploitable weaknesses. Dr. Cathril's carapace shifted to a deeper shade of amber, indicating surprise.
You can identify neural pathway modifications?
Basic human anatomy includes a lot of neurology, Marcus explained. When you live on a world where brain injuries from accidents or predator attacks are common, you learn to recognize the signs. Across the laboratory, his friends were each working with specialists from their respective fields. Corvin was demonstrating saurian hunting techniques to a group of security analysts who were trying to understand how predatory instincts translated into tactical advantages. His massive frame moved with surprising grace as he explained how to track prey by reading subtle environmental cues. The scent trail is only part of the information, he was saying, his deep voice carrying easily through the lab. You must also read the displacement of air, the pattern of disturbed vegetation, the rhythm of movement that each species unconsciously follows. Pip, meanwhile, was interfaced with the Academy's computer systems through a specialized neural link that had been designed specifically for Nemorian physiology. His small hands moved across holographic keyboards with blinding speed as he traced the data signatures that the Ravager attacks had left across the galactic information networks. Found another one, he called out excitedly. There was a data burst transmitted from the Ravager's location approximately 3 minutes before the attack began.
Someone was giving it final targeting instructions. ZYXandra had positioned herself near a specialized sensor array that could detect energy patterns across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Her crystalline form resonated with frequencies that enhanced the equipment's sensitivity by several orders of magnitude.
The energy signature from the Ravager's power core is unlike anything in our databases, she reported, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of concern. The power source appears to be organic, but it generates energy at levels that should be impossible for biological systems. Kethmori floated in a specially constructed analysis tank that allowed him to interface with the facility's deep scan sensors. His bioluminescent patterns pulsed in complex rhythms as he processed information from multiple data streams simultaneously. The water table beneath the academy shows trace contamination, he announced. Molecular signatures suggest that the Ravager was constructed in a facility that uses aqueous suspension chambers for biological modification. The isotopic ratios point to a star system in the Outer Rim territories. Marcus pulled up a star chart and highlighted the region Kethmori had identified.
That's Kethmar in space. Officially, it's a dead system.
No inhabited worlds, no industrial facilities. Officially, Dr. Kethril repeated, her tone suggesting she found that designation suspect. But the Outer Rim has many systems that are officially uninhabited while serving as bases for activities that civilized species prefer not to acknowledge. The investigation had been proceeding for 2 weeks since the Academy attack, and the picture that was emerging grew more disturbing with each piece of evidence they uncovered. The Ravager program was far more extensive and sophisticated than anyone had initially suspected. What had seemed like isolated terrorist incidents was actually a carefully orchestrated campaign that spanned multiple star systems and involved resources that suggested backing from a major power.
Commander Rylex's team found something interesting on Kepler Station, announced Director Havak as he entered the laboratory.
His crystalline carapace reflected the facility's lighting in patterns that indicated both urgency and concern. A new holographic display materialized, showing the ruins of the research facility that had been attacked 3 days earlier. The destruction was extensive, but hidden beneath the obvious damage were subtler signs that told a different story. The attackers weren't just destroying the facility, Marcus observed after studying the patterns for several minutes. They were extracting specific research data.
Precisely, Director Havak confirmed.
The Kepler station team was working on a classified project involving genetic memory storage. They had developed techniques for preserving and transferring the accumulated knowledge and instincts of entire species. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They're not just cataloging our capabilities. They're stealing them. Corvin's massive frame went rigid as the predatory part of his nature responded to the threat. You're saying they can take our natural abilities and give them to their Ravagers? That appears to be the goal, Director Havak confirmed. If they succeed, they could create modified beings that combine the best attributes of every species in the galaxy. Pip's small hands stopped moving across his interfaces as he processed this information.
But that would make them unstoppable.
No single species could stand against enemies that possessed everyone's advantages and none of their weaknesses.
The laboratory fell silent as the full scope of the threat became clear.
They weren't just dealing with terrorists or criminals. They were facing an enemy that sought to supplant the entire galactic community with artificially enhanced beings under their control. There's more, Director Havak continued.
Intelligence reports indicate that similar attacks are being planned against research facilities throughout the galaxy.
Targets include the Etherian Medical Archives on Sanctuary, the Caraxian Military Academy on Fortress Prime, and the Nemorian Technical Institute on New Burrow.
ZYXandra's harmonic voice carried frequencies of deep alarm.
Those facilities contain the accumulated knowledge and capabilities of our most advanced species.
If this enemy gains access to all of them, game over, Marcus finished grimly.
They'll have everything they need to create an army of super Ravagers that can outfight, outthink, and outmaneuver anything we can field against them. The weight of the situation settled over the group like a heavy blanket. They had stumbled onto a conspiracy that threatened not just the Galactic Academy, but the very existence of free civilization in known space.
What can we do? Pip asked, his small voice barely audible in the vast laboratory.
Marcus looked around at his friends, seeing the same determination in their various features that had brought them together during the classroom attack.
We stop them. How? Corvin asked. We're students, not soldiers.
That's exactly why we might be able to stop them, Marcus replied. They're planning for conventional resistance from official military and security forces.
They're not expecting a response from the academic community. Dr. Kethrill's carapace shifted to a pattern that indicated thoughtful consideration. What do you propose?
Marcus walked to the center of the laboratory and activated the main holographic display. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, with the locations of various attacks and target facilities highlighted in red.
They've been moving in a pattern, he said, tracing connections between the various sites.
Each attack builds on information gathered from the previous ones. They started with isolated targets to test their ravagers, then moved to research facilities to gather specific capabilities. The pattern suggests their next target will be a major population center, Kethmori observed, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with analytical precision. Somewhere with both strategic importance and a large concentration of diverse species. Pip's interfaces chimed as he cross-referenced the pattern with galactic shipping schedules and political calendars. The Galactic Trade Summit on Meridian Station. It's scheduled to begin in 6 days, and it will have representatives from every major species.
Marcus nodded grimly. Perfect target.
Maximum diversity for genetic sampling, high symbolic value for psychological impact, and enough chaos to cover their real objective.
Which is? Dr. Kethrill asked.
The Galactic Council's emergency protocols, Marcus replied. During a major crisis like a terrorist attack on the Trade Summit, the Council would activate their emergency response procedures. All the key decision-makers, all the critical information, all the command codes for the galaxy's defense forces would be centralized in one location. The pieces of the conspiracy were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The entire Ravager campaign had been designed to force the galactic government into a defensive posture that would make them vulnerable to a single, decisive strike.
We have to warn the authorities, Zyxandra said.
And we will, Marcus agreed. But we also have to assume that our enemies have infiltrated those same authorities.
They've been planning this for years, possibly decades.
They'll have people in place to ensure that any warnings are ignored or suppressed. Director Havok's crystalline features reflected patterns of deep concern.
What alternative do you propose?
Marcus manipulated the holographic display to show the route between the Academy and Meridian Station.
We go there ourselves.
We gather evidence of the planned attack, identify the infiltrators, and stop them before they can implement their final phase. That's suicide, Commander Rylex's voice came from the laboratory entrance as the security chief strode into the room. You're talking about 6 students and a handful of researchers going up against an enemy that has defeated every military force they've encountered.
No, Marcus corrected.
I'm talking about 6 individuals who represent capabilities that this enemy hasn't encountered before. They've tested their Ravagers against conventional military responses, but they've never faced the kind of adaptive problem-solving that comes from being trained in a truly diverse academic environment. Corvin's predatory grin revealed teeth that glinted in the laboratory lighting.
Plus, they're expecting to face official resistance following official protocols. They're not expecting a hunting pack. Commander Rylex looked around the group, his compound eyes taking in each member before settling on Marcus.
Even if I accepted the logic of your proposal, which I don't, you lack the authority to undertake such an operation.
Actually, came a familiar melodious voice from the laboratory entrance, they do have that authority. Ambassador Threnody entered the laboratory, but she was no longer alone.
Behind her walked figures that made even Commander Rylex straighten to attention, Admiral Vexthal of the Galactic Defense Fleet, High Counselor Zareth of the Etherian Collective, and, most surprisingly, Elder Mordain of the Crystalline Hierarchy.
Elder Mordain's ancient form chimed with frequencies that spoke of wisdom accumulated over millennia.
The Crystalline Hierarchy has monitored the situation with growing concern. Our deep-time analysis indicates that conventional military responses will fail.
Admiral Vexthal's scarred carapace bore the marks of countless battles. The defense fleet agrees.
Our simulations show that the enemy has accounted for every standard tactical response. They've been studying us too long and too well. Therefore, High Counselor Zareth said, her ethereal voice carrying the authority of the galactic government, the Council has voted to authorize an unconventional response. You will be given provisional authority to investigate and neutralize this threat using whatever methods you deem necessary. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They were no longer students playing at being investigators. They had become the galaxy's last hope against an enemy that threatened to destroy everything their civilization had built. "What resources will we have?" he asked. "A small, fast ship with advanced stealth capabilities," Admiral Vexthal replied.
"Enough equipment to maintain your cover as academic researchers attending the trade summit.
And, most importantly, the knowledge that if you fail, there may not be another chance to stop them." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and briefings. Their cover story was established. They were attending the trade summit to present research on interspecies cooperation in crisis situations. Their real mission was to identify and neutralize the Ravager threat before it could achieve its ultimate objective. As they boarded the stealth ship that would take them to Meridian Station, Marcus took one last look back at the Academy. The institution that had shaped him and brought him together with his closest friends might not survive what was coming. But, perhaps, if they succeeded, something better could be built in its place. The ship lifted off into the star-filled void, carrying 6 young beings toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Behind them, the Academy's towers caught the light of the setting sun, a reminder of all they were fighting to preserve. Ahead of them lay Meridian Station, the trap their enemies had prepared, and the final test of everything they had learned about survival, cooperation, and the true meaning of strength. The galaxy would soon discover whether the bonds forged in a classroom could withstand the ultimate trial of fire and blood. Meridian Station rotated slowly against the backdrop of distant stars, its massive rings catching and reflecting the light of 3 different suns. The trading post had been built at the intersection of 5 major hyperspace routes, making it one of the busiest commercial centers in the galaxy. Thousands of ships from hundreds of different species docked here daily, creating a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of cultures, technologies, and opportunities. To most observers, the station appeared to be functioning normally. Cargo haulers moved between the docking bays and storage facilities. Passenger liners discharged travelers who dispersed throughout the station's commercial sectors. The great central spire that housed the trade summit buzzed with activity as delegates prepared for the most important economic conference in decades. But Marcus and his team saw signs that others missed. Their stealth ship, disguised as a small academic research vessel, had approached the station along a trajectory that allowed them to scan for anomalies without drawing attention. What they found confirmed their worst fears.
"Energy readings are all wrong," Zyxandra reported from her position at the sensor array. "There are power signatures hidden throughout the station that don't match any registered systems."
Kethmori's tank had been modified with additional sensor equipment that allowed him to detect minute vibrations through the station's structure.
"Structural modifications in the lower levels. Someone has been installing heavy equipment without proper permits."
Pip's small fingers flew across his interfaces as he infiltrated the station's information networks.
"Security schedules have been altered. Guard rotations, surveillance protocols, emergency response procedures, everything has been subtly modified over the past 6 months."
Corbin studied the docking bay assignments through the ship's viewports, his predatory instincts picking up patterns that spoke of coordinated movement.
Too many ships with similar configuration profiles. They're trying to look random, but the distribution is artificial. Marcus synthesized the information, feeling the familiar clarity that came when chaos resolved into pattern. They're not just planning an attack on the trade summit. They're planning to take control of the entire station. Their ship docked without incident at a berth reserved for academic vessels. The station's automated systems processed their credentials and assigned them temporary quarters in the researcher section, a collection of modest cabins near the central spire where visiting scholars traditionally stayed during conferences. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Marcus was struck by the diversity of the crowd. Etherians glided past with their characteristic grace, their translucent blue forms radiating serenity. Heavily armored Caraxians moved with military precision, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lighting. Small groups of Nemorians scurried between the legs of larger beings, their tiny forms somehow managing to avoid being trampled despite the chaos.
It was beautiful, Marcus reflected. Representatives of dozens of species who had spent millennia learning to live and work together, united by common goals and mutual respect. The thought of this diversity being replaced by identical artificial beings made his jaw clench with determination. "Stay alert," he murmured to his friends.
"Remember, they've been planning this for years. They could have people anywhere." Their first stop was the registration center for the trade summit.
The massive chamber was filled with holographic displays showing trade statistics, resource availability charts, and economic projections for various sectors. Delegates from the major trading powers moved between information kiosks, gathering data that would inform their negotiations over the coming days. Pip separated from the group and approached a data terminal, ostensibly to review the conference schedule. In reality, his enhanced nervous system was interfacing directly with the station's computers, mapping hidden data pathways and identifying unauthorized access points. Xandra positioned herself near a group of crystalline delegates, her form blending naturally with theirs while her enhanced senses scanned for energy signatures that didn't belong. The harmonic frequencies she generated were tuned to detect the specific resonance patterns produced by Ravager technology. Corvin and Kethmori made their way to the observation deck that overlooked the central trading floor. Corvin's height advantage allowed him to scan the crowd for behavioral anomalies, while Kethmori used his aquatic senses to detect biochemical signatures that might indicate stress, deception, or artificial enhancement. Marcus himself headed for the conference center's administrative offices, where his human credentials would allow him to access areas that might be restricted to other species. His cover story as a researcher studying interspecies cooperation protocols gave him a legitimate reason to ask questions about security arrangements and emergency procedures. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. "Got something," came Pip's voice through their encrypted communication channel. "There's a secondary computer network that's not showing up on any official schematics. It's been integrated into the station's infrastructure so carefully that it's almost invisible." "What kind of network?" Marcus asked, making his voice casual as a Vorthan administrator walked past his position. "Command and control system. Someone has built a parallel communication network that can override the station's primary systems. If they activate it, they could control life support, security barriers, even the docking bay force fields." Xandra's harmonic voice carried undertones of urgency. "I'm detecting Ravager energy signatures in the lower maintenance sections. Multiple sources, much more powerful than the unit we encountered at the Academy." Corvin's deep voice rumbled through the comm channel. "Confirmed. I'm seeing coordinated movement patterns among groups that should be acting independently. Security personnel, maintenance workers, even some of the trade delegates. They're all following the same behavioral script." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying precision. The enemy hadn't just infiltrated Meridian Station, they had taken control of it. The trade summit was proceeding exactly as scheduled, but it was proceeding according to their enemy's schedule, not the legitimate authorities. "We need to get to the lower levels," Marcus said, abandoning his casual tone. "If they have Ravagers positioned throughout the station, the attack could begin at any moment." They regrouped near a maintenance access point that Pip had identified as relatively secure. The small Nemorian had already disabled the security sensors in the immediate area, giving them a narrow window to access the station's hidden infrastructure. The maintenance tunnels beneath Meridian Station were a maze of pipes, conduits, and support structures that few beings ever saw. The air was thick with the smell of recycled atmosphere and industrial lubricants. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly green glow that made the shadow seem deeper and more threatening. They had been moving through the tunnels for only a few minutes when they encountered the first sign that their fears were justified. A section of corridor that should have contained only life support equipment instead housed a collection of stasis pods, each one containing a dormant Ravager. 12 units, Corvin counted, his predatory instincts automatically cataloging the threat. Each one is larger and more heavily modified than the Academy attacker. Kethmori's bioluminescent patterns flickered with patterns of deep concern. The stasis fluid contains genetic material from multiple species. They're not just enhanced, they're hybridized. Marcus studied the pods, noting the sophisticated life support systems and the wireless communication arrays built into each unit. They can be activated remotely. When the signal comes, all 12 will deploy simultaneously. Signal from where? Xandra asked. Pip was already interfacing with the pod systems, his enhanced nervous system tracing the communication pathways back to their source. Control center is 3 levels up, directly beneath the central spire. Heavily shielded, multiple redundant systems. That's where the real enemy will be, Marcus said. Not some distant coordinator, but someone who needs to be close enough to manage the final phase personally. They moved deeper into the station's hidden infrastructure, discovering more stasis pods, weapon caches, and modifications to critical systems. The scope of the conspiracy became clear. Their enemies had been preparing for years, positioning resources and personnel throughout one of the galaxy's most important installations. The control center, when they finally reached it, was a testament to careful planning and advanced technology. Banks of quantum computers processed data streams from thousands of sources throughout the galaxy. Holographic displays showed the positions of ships, the locations of key personnel, and countdown timers that indicated how little time remained before the final attack. At the center of it all stood a figure that made Marcus's blood run cold. The being had once been humanoid, but extensive modification had transformed it into something that combined the worst aspects of several different species. Its torso was elongated and covered in chitinous armor like a Caraxian's, but more angular and threatening. Its limbs had been replaced with mechanical appendages that ended in sophisticated manipulator arrays. Most disturbing of all, its head contained multiple sensory organs taken from different species, creating a nightmarish fusion of eyes, acoustic sensors, and electromagnetic detection apparatus. So, the creature said, its voice a synthesized harmony of tones from a dozen different languages. The human Deathworlder and his friends have found us at last. Marcus stepped forward, his friends flanking him in a formation they had practiced during their weeks of preparation. Call off the attack. Release the hostages. End this before more beings have to die. The creature laughed, a sound that incorporated harmonic frequencies from species throughout the galaxy. You still don't understand, do you? There are no hostages. Every being on this station is already under our control. Holographic displays around the control center lit up with images from throughout Meridian Station. In the Trade Summit chamber, delegates continued their discussions, unaware that neural control implants had been subtly influencing their decisions for months. In the security centers, guards followed patrol routes that had been designed to leave critical areas undefended at specific times. Even in the residential sections, civilians went about their daily routines while microscopic nanobots in the air recycling system slowly prepared them for neural subjugation. The Galactic Council will arrive within the hour, the creature continued. They will trigger their emergency protocols exactly as we predicted. And, when they centralize all decision-making authority into their crisis management system, that system will belong to us. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a heavy cloak. Everything they had fought for, everything the galaxy had built over millennia of cooperation and growth, was about to be swept away by beings who saw diversity as weakness rather than strength. Why, he asked. Why destroy something so beautiful? Because it is weak, the creature replied. Because cooperation makes you vulnerable. Because individual species clinging to their unique characteristics prevent the galaxy from achieving its true potential. And what potential is that? Unity through perfection. Every being modified to optimal specifications. Every world functioning according to rational design. Every action serving the greater purpose instead of individual whims. The creature gestured to the displays showing the station's population. These beings waste their potential on trivial pursuits, personal relationships, inefficient emotional responses. We will free them from these limitations. Marcus looked around the control center, noting the positions of the automated defense systems, the locations of critical control nodes, and the structural weaknesses that might be exploited. His friends were doing the same, each of them using their species' unique capabilities to assess the tactical situation. There's one thing you don't understand, Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had sustained him through every crisis he'd faced. And what is that, human? Marcus smiled, and, for a moment, every being in the control center was reminded of exactly why humans were classified as a Deathworlder species. It wasn't their physical capabilities or their endurance, though both were formidable. It was their absolute refusal to surrender, even when facing impossible odds. You assume that diversity makes us weak, Marcus said. But, you've spent so long studying our individual capabilities that you never learned how they work together. The attack began before the creature could respond. But, it wasn't the kind of coordinated military assault that their enemies had prepared for. Instead, it was something far more dangerous, the improvised, adaptive response of beings who had learned to trust each other completely. Pip vanished into the control center's computer systems, his small form slipping through maintenance conduits that had been designed for automated repair drones. Within seconds, he was interfacing directly with the quantum computers, using his species' intimate knowledge of galactic information networks to turn the enemy's own systems against them. ZYX Andra positioned herself at the harmonic resonance point of the chamber and, began generating frequencies that interfered with the sophisticated sensor arrays built into the creature's modified head.
The cacophony of conflicting signals left it temporarily blind and deaf to the chaos erupting around it.
Corvin moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator that had been given a target worthy of its capabilities. The automated defense systems had been programmed to counter military tactics, but they had no protocols for dealing with something that hunted by instinct rather than training. Kethmori, still in his mobile tank but now connected to the control center's environmental systems, began systematically altering the atmospheric composition throughout the chamber. The modifications were subtle but critical enough to disrupt the creature's artificial respiratory system without affecting the organic beings in the room. And Marcus himself did what humans did best. He adapted. The creature's multiple sensory organs gave it theoretical advantages over any single species, but Marcus had learned to fight alongside beings with capabilities he could never match.
He didn't need to see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. HFY could do that.
He didn't need to process multiple data streams simultaneously. Pip was handling that. He didn't need superhuman strength or speed. Corvin provided both. What Marcus brought to the fight was something that couldn't be artificially replicated, the ability to coordinate diverse capabilities into a unified response that was greater than the sum of its parts.
The battle lasted less than 5 minutes.
When it ended, the creature lay deactivated among the ruins of its control center, its various systems sparking and failing as Pip's infiltration programs systematically dismantled the network that had taken years to build. Throughout Meridian Station, stasis pods cracked open to reveal inert ravagers whose activation codes had been corrupted.
Security systems reset to their original configurations.
The neural control implants that had been influencing thousands of beings dissolved harmlessly as their command signals were replaced with deactivation codes. In the Trade Summit chamber, delegates continued their discussions, unaware that the fate of galactic civilization had just been decided in a maintenance tunnel far beneath their feet.
Is it over?
Xyxandra asked, her crystalline form still resonating with combat frequencies. Marcus looked around at his friends, seeing the same exhaustion and relief in their various features that he felt in his own bones.
This part is. But there will be others. This kind of threat doesn't just disappear. Pip emerged from the computer systems, his small form trembling with fatigue. Found something interesting in their databases. This wasn't the only operation.
They have cells like this throughout the galaxy.
Then, we'll stop them too, Corvin said simply. All of them. Kethmori's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with patterns of determination.
The galaxy survived because we learned to work together.
We'll keep it that way.
As they made their way back to the surface levels of Meridian Station, Marcus reflected on everything they had learned.
The enemy had been right about one thing: the galaxy's diversity did create vulnerabilities.
Different species had different weaknesses, different blind spots, different limitations. But diversity also created something that artificial unity could never match: the ability to adapt, to overcome, to find solutions that no single perspective could discover alone.
The Trade Summit continued for 3 more days, reaching agreements that would shape galactic commerce for decades to come.
The delegates never learned how close they had come to losing everything they were working to build. Marcus and his friends returned to the Galactic Academy as quietly as they had left, resuming their studies as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They had seen what the galaxy was capable of becoming if beings forgot the value of their differences. They had also learned that sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in becoming something more than what you were. Sometimes it was in becoming something better than what you were, not through artificial enhancement, but through the bonds you formed with others who were different from yourself. The classroom where it all began had been repaired and returned to normal use. Professor Vextari continued her lectures on xenobiology, though she now included case studies on adaptive cooperation under extreme stress. Students from dozens of species continued to gather there, learning not just facts and theories, but how to see strength in difference and unity in diversity. And, in the back of the room, 6 friends sat together, sharing knowledge and perspectives that no single species could provide alone. They had learned that the universe was vast and dangerous, filled with beings who would use strength to dominate rather than protect. But they had also learned that as long as there were those willing to stand together, not as uniform copies of the same ideal, but as unique individuals united by common purpose, the galaxy would endure. The greatest victory wasn't in the defeated enemy or the saved station. It was in the simple fact that tomorrow, they would all return to class together, ready to learn something new about the endless possibilities that emerged when different species chose cooperation over conquest. After all, the best lessons were often learned not from textbooks, but from the friends who helped you survive long enough to understand them.